So welcome back to my slot in the channel. But today I'll be talking to you about the controversial utilization of the very problematic trope that dehumanizes lead minority characters in animated movies. So this is a trope that involves the separation from characters and their bodies. Animated movies, of course, are the perfect environment to bring fantasy to life. However, they also present major problems in regards to racial tropes, which must be heavily considered. Moves for inclusion of minority characters as leads may appear revolutionary, but is decidedly not. Unfortunately, too many times, non-white characters have been dehumanized by being transformed or portrayed as non-human for the majority of their development within the film. It's been painfully apparent, if not when I was younger, but definitely now, that any animated character that's a person of color as a lead has to undergo some kind of transformation that white animated characters just don't have to. The unfettered growth of racial trope in animated movies that turn non-white characters into animals or other beings is troubling and needs to be unpacked, and that's what we're going to do today in this video. In this video, I will focus on how this trope is imposed on black lead characters based on the depiction of Disney's current roster, the dehumanizing trope that Disney imposes on their black leading characters by way of separating their bodies and racial identities goes against their attempts to answer the calls of increasing representation, at least beyond the surface, in my opinion. Once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. Disney's Blue Skies, and now Pixar's first black leading characters just can't stay human. It's no longer a question anymore about putting color on the screen in a symbolic way. The issues lie in the lack of authentic storytelling of minority experiences. It's a trend that has hidden diverse faces and held back real meaningful progress when it comes to representation. It's a trend that has also robbed audiences of opportunities to see how minorities face the world and connect with their experiences. Black people are not a monolith. I'm so sorry about it. And by continuing this usage of this trope perpetuates this violence that boxes blackness in. The trope does not allow for the discovery or exploration and much needed insights of black life. In fact, it does the opposite. By having black characters play into the dehumanizing trope that separates body and race, it's actually taking away from the screen time of these characters in their human forms, where they're unable now to explore their identities in the form they started in. Once the characters assume their new forms, the film no longer has to deal with the individual issues and challenges tied to their identities. The suggestion here is that, this could be deliberate and blackness may just be too serious for Disney to cover, or they just don't have the range to deliver or execute this insight. We can see this obvious disparity of this trope from 2009's Princess and the Frog to Disney's Pixar's latest offering, Soul, which after 11 years attempts to address this trope. In The Princess and the Frog, the first and only Disney movie with a black protagonist, the main character transforms into an animal. To be exact, a frog. In Pixar's film Soul, which is the first Pixar movie with a black protagonist, the main character turns into a soul. In the only 2 Disney movies with black protagonists, the main character transforms into something non-human. So how is Disney representing people of color if their characters are unrecognizable as humans for the majority of their development? Anthropomorphizing non-white characters is not limited to these 2 films, so I'd like to give some mention here to other examples, which includes The Emperor's New Groove in 2000, and Brother Bear of 2003. And outside of Disney, the 20th Century Studio film Spies in Disguise, played by Will Smith. Hate to break it to you, but Disney also owns that too, and that's a bigger mess and we're not even gonna go there. However, for the purposes of this video, I will be exploring Disney's offerings of black experiences and examine how their magic of Disneyness, aka what I believe to be their deliberate, selective amnesia towards authentic depictions and storytelling through their digestible formula, contributes to the further dismissal and silencing of black experiences. The disturbing trope of robbing non-white characters of much-needed representation screen time and detaching them from their racial and ethnic identities negates efforts of increased representation, in my opinion. The Princess and the Frog may just be the most frustrating example of this. Tiana is a black woman living in 1920s New Orleans, putting all of her considerable energy, hard work, and savings towards her dream of opening her own family restaurant after her father passes away. Sorry for the spoiler. But during the first section of the movie, audiences see her struggle against sexism and racial prejudice right off the bat. Investors aren't willing to back her solely because she's a black woman, and they try to be discreet. However, I quote, they said, "A little woman of your background would have had her hands full trying to run a big business like that. No, it's better to stay where you're at," end quote. But the potential to take a deeper dive into how she navigates this world is abruptly pushed aside so we can see the transformed frog Tiana. Watch a jazz-loving alligator play trumpets. Normally, I would be all about seeing a reptile killing the game with some jazzy tunes, but it's hard to get behind this change in focus when it comes at such a high cost. Surely, some members of the film's audience have never experienced the challenges a character like Tiana faces, have never had their ambitions stalled and their careers hampered down due to systemic racism or sexism. If they were presented with a movie that spends half of its runtime showing what this experience actually looks like, driving home how real it is, they could gain a better understanding and appreciation of what a black woman like Tiana is truly up against. Disney missed out on an opportunity to share a truthful story of a black experience from the black woman's perspective and fumbled the bag, respectfully. On the other hand, there are, of course, white or non-people of color audience members who will take one look at Tiana's story and instantly draw parallels to their own. Seeing Tiana overcome all the barriers that stand in the way of her opening a restaurant may inspire them. It could also give them inspiration and ideas on how to confront and break down walls holding, themselves back. I just think that's all dandy, but how can I identify with the frog? They could have easily just given us the same script, same story, in human form, but instead of taking the opportunity to educate and enlighten the audience about different ways to beat a stacked system while telling their story, the film's writer chose to teach us about how much frogs produce mucus. And let me tell you, I guess it's a big deal because it does get her out of a couple sticky situations. When diverse characters lose their identities, the audience loses opportunities to absorb valuable lessons and insights. I am convinced that Disney finds joy and feels good in producing mediocrity. Listen, I ate it all the way up too. But let's be real, the people up there making decisions must feel so good about themselves, even patting themselves on the back for giving us a black princess. The truth of the matter is, Princess and the Frog has been a story that existed long before our good sis, Tiana. In fact, she was a white woman with red hair, and because we were screaming for diversity and representation amongst the princesses, they thought, hey, wait a minute, let's make her black, change the setting to New Orleans, and literally throw her in a swamp. That should tick off the boxes. Before I get too carried away, let's just jump right into, 2020 with the latest in Disney Pixar's offering, Soul. You would think, after 11 years later, we could spice it up for my people, but still, the black characters as main leads are still playing into the dehumanizing tropes. The film follows Joe, a jazz musician and a band teacher, voiced by Jamie Foxx. When he travels to another plane of existence, he is transformed into a ghost-like blob-shaped creature thing. Soul is not your typical lighthearted moment like many of Disney's other animated movies. Disney here relies on the introspective and deep style that Pixar is known for that resonates with adults and children. So this partnership here almost is like a certifier and positions Disney in the conversation of representation. I guess on the right side, ... Despite being treated as the most creative and soul-searching film of Pixar's lineup, Soul still kind of fails to impress the audience with this teaser that was released earlier in the year. The trailer of the film worried many fans who speculated that Soul must be the latest addition to the running list of animated movies perpetuating the harmful trope of transforming the black leads into other beings. We can't believe that after a couple movies that all the representation issues will be put to bed. As Nightmarish Conjuring's review of the film points out, quote, overall, Joe is a black man in his black body for less than 20 minutes in the entire film, end quote, pointing to the main character's general lack of agency, strangely uninterested in exploring Joe's identity as a black man throughout the story. As Pauline Moore points out in another review, Soul comes across less as an earnest and casual celebration of everyday blackness, and more like a twee depiction of if that's meant for white audiences' consumption. Exacerbated by the film's near forcible separation of Joe and his blackness literally and figuratively, and with so little attention paid to his backstory early on, it's hard to argue with that. So really, it's understandable at the end of the day why black audiences are not interested / jumping for joy at the thought of Joe turning into a generic blue blob. Why? Because we've seen this before, 11 years to be exact, with not much change. Every second he spends transformed is a missed opportunity as audiences get less and less time to understand what it's like to step into the shoes of a black man. This is all being said without even acknowledging the lack of diversity in the creative process. Soul has a cast of talented black actors, yet most of the top writers, producers, composers, and other people working behind the scenes are white. If there is no diversity in the film's creation, the film's true value as representation is deceptive. It shouldn't be a given decision to turn a leading character of color in animation films into a creature of another species. Whether these decisions were actively made to avoid showing characters of color on screen for most of the movie or not, it's not acceptable to have such a long pattern of this dehumanization. Through these examples, it's clear that it's not enough representation to change the color of animated characters. Instead, the direction should be towards intentionally putting more diverse experiences on screen for longer than 30 minutes. Because of this reduced screen time, many members of Disney's target audience, young children, are unable to see themselves represented as they are. Not all representation is a good attempt if the intention is not behind elevating black people within the industry, in my opinion. What's more alarming, however, is what children take away from these castings. These systems in place where even black characters in animated form don't elevate in a role as humans. Alright, so just to kind of start these closing remarks, I'd like to start off with Disney and how they create things that will sell, and that often means making changes based on public criticism. As society continues to become more aware of the value of diversity in film, it has become relatively more common to see diverse casts in film. If Disney continues to turn their non-white characters into animals, they will fail to represent those underrepresented groups, which in turn influences how future generations will see themselves in society. In conclusion, separating black characters from their black bodies and the inability to see their innate humanity simply just needs to stop. It is disrespectful, and it's okay to not be satisfied with these crumbs of representation. It's not a vibe. It's definitely not for me. And this disturbing trope of robbing minority characters of much needed representation screen time by then detaching them from their racial and ethnic identities is not answering the call for more representation, or at least not doing a good job of it. Although it may be impossible to change the heart of Disney, we can still exercise our consumer sovereignty to force Disney to change how they make their films and even maybe persuade them to consider their past mistakes and recognize them. I know that's a long shot, but it's still a thought or a practice that we can take into consideration. That's a big one for me because unfortunately I'll still be watching Disney because it is an internal struggle that I face every day. And we'll be working through. But nonetheless, hopefully y'all followed me along in this video. More like a rant, I'm so sorry. But yes, that's the end. Like, comment, subscribe, share, however these people do it. But yeah, thank you.